In case you were wondering, I'm around 12,000 years old. Well, chronologically at least. My body was frozen during the last ice age. Biologically, though, I'm technically only 23 years old. I wasn't really told where I was found, but anyways, here's my story. I was defrosted 4 years ago. I was biologically 19 at the time. I don't know how they resuscitated me, but they managed to wake me up from the cryo sleep I was in. I wake up on a giant rock, surrounded by grass everywhere. As any sane caveman would, I started panicking, not knowing what the hell was going on. As I walked around cautiously, I bump into, well, air. I later would come to know that it was just a painted wall. And by the way, I'd like to take a minute to appreciate how amazingly my supposed containment chamber was made to replicate a grassland biome. A good 2 hours went by, and nothing happened. I began to feel at ease knowing that there were no predators to worry about. I know it's weird, but I grew up a caveman, so give me a break. Just as I was recovering from my panic, the air around 20 feet to my right just opens into some black void, and two animals with black and white fur walk into the clearing I was in. Their heads were somewhat similar to mine, but their eyes were completely black, like just a space of black where their eyes should be. As any sane caveman would do, I tried to haul ass out of there, only to crash into air. At this point, I was absolutely terrified. It's hilarious to look back and think about it, now that I was scared of a guy in a suit wearing shades. But it wasn't back then. As I backed up into the invisible barrier in the air, these two creatures stopped and looked at each other. Then both of them took off their fur coats and black eyes, and in front of me stood two humans, buck naked. This was a huge relief for me, realizing that these two were humans wearing animal hide and ornaments on their eyes. Although I've never seen an animal with weird fur like that, it definitely would have provided a decent intimidation against many predators of my time. One of the two humans steps forward, crouches down and extends an open hand to me. To us primitive humans, this was a sign of peace and association. I slowly took his hand. The other guy did the same. After our primal handshake, they faced each other and started muttering some complex vocal call to each other. By the looks of it, they seemed excited. Two more humans with the same fur coat walked through the black void. These were female. One of them had a bowl carved from rock with water in it. She handed it to me. I was pretty thirsty, so I drank it immediately. The other female presented a red block to me. It was definitely some kind of raw flesh. I was used to eating raw flesh as well, so I bit into it. I immediately spit it out. The taste was overwhelming, and nothing like I've ever eaten before. It sort of tasted like seawater. I would later come to know this was due to common salt. The female looked surprised for a second. Then she held something that looked like a yellow version of my genitalia. She ripped off the yellow skin to reveal a white mass of food inside. She gave it to me. It didn't look like any form of meat. Rather, it resembled a plant. I took a bite. It was loads better than the block of meat. I voraciously gobbled down the plant thing as these four humans sat down watching me, buck naked. As time went on, I kept getting fed by these humans walking through the black void in the air. This one particular guy would come in every day with lots of objects and animals. He would show me something while saying some vocal call. I eventually learned to repeat after him. This went on every day. I learned to communicate in English 2 years after my defrosting. As the months passed, I was eventually taken through the black void, which was just a door leading to a dark hallway. I met lots of new people and got to know about the modern world, where people lived in trees made of stone and mounted shiny animals with circular feet. To be honest, the world was too loud and bright for my liking, and I had trouble adjusting. I eventually got the hang of it, although I'm allergic to dust. As of now, I'm the academic equivalent of a middle school student. I can read, write, cook, use a telephone, and surprisingly even drive. I guess living in the wild does make you quick to adapt. Anyways, now I'll tell you about life during the Ice Age. My memory is a bit hazy, but I remember some important stuff. I was born into a tribe which lived next to a forest. We had a cave for shelter. Behind the cave, around half a mile away, lied a big lake. In front of the cave, a few miles away through a vast stretch of grassland, lied a big valley. We often found prehistoric deer grazing throughout the expanse of grass. At the bottom of the valley, an occasional mammoth would pass by. We considered them as last resort meat, given how aggressive and dangerous they were. I was born a hunter, given the history of my forefathers. The most badass of them all had to be my grandfather. Word has it that he went toe-to-toe against 2 cave bears alone. And trust me, cave bears are no joke. Those guys could definitely take on a pack of direwolves or saber-tooths to steal their kills. I was taught to hunt and kill by my grandfather at a very young age. I was lucky to have been trained though, as my adventurous nature led me into dangerous situations, like that one time I was chased by a pack of baboons. Anyways, at least I was athletic enough to outrun some of the threats out there. Many young children usually fell prey to opportunistic wolves or terror birds. Needless to say, most of my life revolved around hunting, running away, and training with grandfather. That's just how life was in those days. You had to eat. You had to survive. I guess even those carnivores had to feed themselves. Can't say I blame them. But there are some things in this world that I believe are pure evil. These very things are the reason my father died. His death happens to be the most vivid and terrifying memory I have. It happened when I was about 6 winters old. I was running around in the forest while my father collected anything edible from the area. I used to spend time with my father like this, playing and running around while he attended to his errands. I heard my father shout, waving me over. I ran over and embraced him. I looked up with a smile. He looked back, smiling through his full black beard. He pointed in the direction of the cave and proceeded to walk away. I looked on as he headed towards the cave. I didn't want to return just yet, so I decided to explore, as usual. I walked deeper into the forest until I reached the edge of the bright side. In front of me was a dark canopy. The trees were tall with widely spread out leaves, which allowed very little light to the forest floor. The elders had forbidden anyone to enter this section of the forest. They never really gave a reason, and I was dying with curiosity. I stepped into the woods. It took me a minute to get adjusted to the dark. I started exploring immediately. It took me a while to realize that I went in too deep. As I turned back to head home, a primal, instinctual fear deep within my being overcame me. I didn't dare move or make a sound. It felt as if one sound from me would mean my death. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't cooperate. Suddenly, I felt something grab me and cover my mouth. Whatever it was ducked behind a big rock with me. I looked at the figure. It was my father. I had never seen my father as terrified as he was right now. We heard twigs and tree branches snapping in the distance. I tried to peek from behind the rock. All I saw was the dark outline of trees and a black bipedal figure trudging around 300 feet away from us. It was heading in our direction. My father seemed calm, but I knew that deep down, even he was scared stiff. Father motioned towards the edge of the dark forest from where I entered. We started to crouch walk cautiously towards the edge. My father stopped dead in his tracks. He looked up at the treetops. I followed his gaze and almost gasped at the sight. It was another dark figure. It had climbed up a tree and started sniffing. It was only a matter of time they found us. We looked back, deep into the forest. The first creature was still looking around. I still felt we could escape. That's when the creature turned to face us, and I could see a pair of menacing red eyes glaring straight at us. My father immediately grabbed me and ran sideways, trying to move around the second creature and towards the edge of the forest. We heard heavy footsteps and the crashing of branches behind us. I looked to my left and saw another creature, probably the same one from the treetop, chasing from our side. It blocked our only path of escape. My father carried me deeper into the woods. He zigzagged around and tried to put some distance. We stopped near a rock formation as we couldn't hear their footsteps anymore. My father looked around nervously. He looked at the giant heap of rocks. He pointed towards it, motioning for me to hide. I got into a small crevice, just barely big enough for me to fit in. All of a sudden, we heard a monstrous scream in the distance. The sound of footsteps echoed through the forest. My father looked at me. He had a look of satisfaction on his face. He smiled at me and reached out his hand to pat my head. He signaled for me to keep quiet. He started a fire to send out a smoke signal with what remaining time he had left. The footsteps got louder. My father turned and screamed at the top of his lungs as something came crashing through the bushes and grabbed my father. With the light of the fire, I could clearly see the monstrosity before me. It was a humanoid beast with black skin and a protruding jaw filled with sharp needle-like teeth. Spiky ridges lined its back, and its blood-red eyes portrayed its lust for death. The thing started ripping through my father's torso. I could hear my father's screams, but I frozen in place. The sound of flesh tearing and bones breaking filled my ears. I could only sit there and sob. I heard the thing sniffing. It stomped closer to the crevice I was in and peered into the gap. If I hadn't moved deeper in out of its line of sight at the last second, I would have ended up like my father. I could see the thing's face up close, the gaze of its eyes forever burned within my soul. After a few seconds, it retreated and let out a deafening scream. I heard it stomp away, but I didn't move. I waited for what felt like hours, until I heard the voice of my grandfather whisper to me. I looked up and saw him crouched in front of the crevice. He carried me home. I heard the sound of twigs snapping occasionally, but I never saw the creature again. Back at the village, everyone surrounded me. My mother held me in her arms as all I could do was cry. Everyone was eager to know what happened. My grandfather simply stood at the clearing, staring at the woods. Then something came flying from the woods and landed in the clearing. I looked at the object. It was a head. My father's head. The look of terror still glued to his face. My grandfather fell to his knees, while my mother held me tightly, sobbing silently. And now, for my message to everyone. There is a reason why a lot of horror movies showcase giant black humanoid monsters with red eyes and elongated skulls. There is a reason why the darkness of the woods awakens a primal instinct, thousands of years old, within all of us. Aside from me wanting to share my experiences with you all, what prompted me to type this out was an incident that happened a week ago. I was in the parking lot of a grocery store with my assigned attendant one night. While loading the groceries in my truck, I glanced at the woods behind the parking lot. I looked deep into the trees, and I saw what appeared to be two red eyes in the distance, staring directly at me.